Hi, chat! Oh man, I was really worried for a moment that I was not going to be able to stream today, because I promised that I would stream once more before I moved back up to college for the semester, and I do that tomorrow morning. So, it was either I stream tonight or I break a promise, and I hate breaking promises. And besides, I really wanted to read this next chapter because in the previous chapter, Tommy and Wilbur, left Zephys 4, but surprise, Eldingvegr, the SMP Empire, was just waiting for them to come out of their protection, and they got captured immediately. So, we're gonna see what happens with that. And as always, if you enjoy my stream, be sure to check out my other socials. You can see it in the title, !socials in the chat. We'll send you to my link tree. Oh, I need to update my Discord link invite. Or Discord invite link. I don't have time to do it tonight. I have a lot of shit to pack still. But yeah, sorry also that the stream is so late. I impromptu went to karaoke with my parents, and I always love going to karaoke with them, so I was like, I wanna go, and I also wanna hang out with my parents one last time before I'm not gonna see them for a while. So without further ado, let's get into this chapter, shall we? Boop. This is gonna be so fun. I'm going to cry, probably. Let me get my tissues, just as a precaution. Alright. The Stars and Their Children is a fanfiction by Bones and the Bees. Amazing, amazing author. Cannot stress it enough. I need to clean my glasses real quick. There we go. Chapter 27. On Death Row. Also, is the music too quiet? I feel like the music is too quiet. I'm gonna turn it up. Or maybe it's not. I can't tell. I'm just gonna turn it up just a little bit. There we go. There we go. That should hopefully be a bit more equalized, I guess. Anyway, I keep getting sidetracked. Chapter 27. On Death Row. Summary. The boys are back on Eldingvegr. Any trigger warnings? Nope. I'm not seeing this. Wait, due to certain IRL circumstances involving CC Dream that only came to light somewhat recently, I no longer wish to include him in my works. He's going to appear in the finale of the fic since I began the story in April of 2022 and want to finish all the story as I planned it, but also I write characters and not CCs. Makes sense. So the representation of Dream you see here is based entirely off C-Dream. Just wanted to note that for anyone concerned, and he won't appear in this chapter, he's only going to appear in chapter 28. Okay, cool. This deja vu was not a welcome feeling. When Sapnap had told Wilbur and Tommy that they were being brought back to Eldingvegr, he wasn't sure what to expect. Would they be brought straight to their executions? Would they be put in a prison cell? Would they be separated? On the royal ship, they'd been gagged and placed in a holding cell. Neither of them were allowed to ask questions, and spent the entire ride to Eldingvegr huddled in a corner, holding on to each other for dear life. At least until a medical officer showed up and jabbed them both with a tranquilizer. Wilbur woke up in a room that was all too familiar to him despite not having seen it in months. His bedroom had been stripped of everything that made it his. The art on his walls, the books on his desk, the clothes in his closet. But he knew where he was nonetheless. The W scratched into the bottom of his bed frame as a child proved it. Strangely enough, Tommy was allowed to stay with him. Once Wilbur had opened his eyes, he rolled over to find Tommy passed out on the bed beside him. Both of their gags had been removed, but a silencing barrier shimmered in front of the door. The two guards just stood beyond it, and Wilbur was thrown back to when he and Tommy had found Nikki in the exact same situation during their initial escape. The deja vu of it all was practically choking him. Being back in his childhood bedroom, watching the silencing barrier hum with energy, looking out his window to see dusty pink skies when he'd grown so accustomed to seeing ice instead. They were right back in the heart of the invasion. Except this time, they didn't have the element of surprise on their side. They didn't have anything on their side. It was only a matter of time. Do you think Dream's setting up some fucked up torture device to kill us with? And that's why we're waiting here? Tommy asked after they'd finished searching every inch of Wilbur's room for a possible escape route, to no avail. Tommy's voice was hoarse, and his eyes were bright red from crying. He'd woken up in the midst of a panic attack, and Wilbur had been forced to push down his own terror to try and help his little brother. Since the initial panic, though, the terror, well, it hadn't subsided. It was still there, lingering under his skin like electricity while pushing nausea up his throat. But at the same time, it was as if it was muted. He could feel it, but he was too exhausted to get worked up about it again. Wilbur was numb. This was the best way to describe it. He and Tommy were trapped on Eldingvegr, completely at the mercy of a man who had every reason in the world to execute them as soon as possible. They were going to die. There was no question about it. Now it was just a matter of when. I don't know, Wilbur mumbled, forehead resting against his window. Maybe he's trying to be theatrical about it, building a giant guillotine or some shit so he can make it a public celebration. Tommy's face twisted in disgust at that, the dried tears on his cheeks cracking at the movement. Would people really watch that? Wilbur shrugged. He might force them. That's fucked up, Tommy muttered, pulling his knees up to his chest. Outside the window, Wilbur's eyes lingered on the silverwood trees. Some had blackened trunks, and he thought back to the way they shimmered when he watched them burn. Others were smaller than he remembered them being, and he wondered if Dream had the gardeners plant new ones to replace those that had been lost during the invasion. Wilbur wondered if this was what Nikki's view had been during her time in Asempi custody. How many days had she spent sitting on the floor of her room, staring at the burnt-out husks of silverwood trees and wondering if Wilbur and Tommy would ever come back for her? How long had it taken her to decide to take matters into her own hands? Had she known she was going to be put into Thamesian custody? Or did she believe she was just waiting for her own execution? The same as Wilbur and Tommy were doing right now. If you got to choose how you died, what would you pick? Wilbur wasn't sure where the question had come from. Maybe it was because when the wind was howling like the screams of the damned, he felt like death was never far behind. Maybe it was because he could still remember the way the metal screeched as his mother's ship was torn to pieces, and he always wondered how painful it had been for her. Maybe it was a question he'd always wanted to ask his mother, but she would have chosen if she'd gotten a say in the matter. What she would have chosen if she'd gotten a say in the matter instead of what fate wrought. Or maybe it was just a question that popped up in his head for no good reason. It's not like it mattered either way. Nikki, whose makeup had rubbed off under her eyes and was swaying from side to side like she was going to fall asleep at any moment, frowned at the question. "That's a bit dark, isn't it?" she asked, her words slurred with exhaustion. "It's just a question." Wilbur shrugged, eyes focused on his bedroom ceiling. Beside him, Nikki let out a soft sigh and forced herself to sit up straight. "I'm guessing I can't choose old and warm in my bed, surrounded by family?" Wilbur shook his head. "No, it's anything that's not an old age kind of death." Humming, Nikki rubbed at her eyes, smearing her makeup even more. I don't really know," she admitted, bringing her knees up to her chest and resting her head on top of them. "I obviously wouldn't want it to be painful, but I think what's most important to me is that I have a say in it." At this, Wilbur furrowed his brows. "What?" "If I have to die, I don't want it to be at the mercy of some other person or outside force. I want it to be under my terms," Nikki explained quietly. "If I'm on a ship that crashes, I want to be the one piloting it. If I drown, I want to be the one that jumped in the water. If I'm murdered..." "Murder?" Wilbur cut in, eyes going wide. "I mean, anything's possible," Nikki pointed out. "So if I'm murdered, I want to be the one who started the fight. Does that make sense?" Clenching his jaw, Wilbur nodded. "Agency. You want agency in your death." "Yeah, that's it." Her half-lidded gaze flickered back to Wilbur, curiosity sparking inside the silver. "What about you?" At the time, Wilbur didn't have an answer as well thought out as Nikki's. The most he could come up with was that he didn't want it to hurt. But now, staring death right in the face, Wilbur thought he understood her answer a lot more than he had before. It was so much easier to be at the mercy of the waves inside of him compared to being at the mercy of someone he'd never even looked in the eye. The sea foam was still fizzling. The salt water was still burning his lungs, but he'd learned to accept it. The waves were just as much a part of him as his own two hands. It didn't mean he could control it. No, far from it. But it didn't hurt to breathe anymore, and he considered that a small victory in the face of the ultimate loss. Even still, he didn't have what Nikki said she wanted in her own death. Agency. It was entirely possible she was still alive, but it was equally as possible that she had died after escaping Eldingvegger. And if that was the case, well, he hoped she'd gotten her wish, that it had been under her terms and no one else's. Tearing his eyes away from the window, Wilbur focused on Tommy again. He was sitting on top of Wilbur's bed, curled in so tightly on himself, it was like he thought that if he could make himself small enough, no one would see him. Wilbur saw him. Wilbur saw the shaky, terrified mess that his little brother was, and got the urge to cry all over again. Because things weren't supposed to be this way. Tommy should have been stretched out across Wilbur's bed, complaining about how he didn't want to do the homework Foolish assigned him. Nikki should have been sitting at Wilbur's desk, trying not to giggle as she and Wilbur shared exasperated looks across the room. Tubbo should have been leaning against the door frame, reminding Tommy they only had a few minutes before his break was over and he needed to get back to his lessons. But there was one thing Wilbur could be grateful for, and it was that he and Tommy were together. Things weren't the same between them, but they were still together even at the end. No one could take that away from them. Not even Dream. Even if Wilbur couldn't have agency in his own death, he could have control over one thing. Tommy, Wilbur began, his voice low. Do you want to talk about it? Tommy glanced down at Wilbur on the floor, brows furrowed in confusion. Talk about what? You know, everything we were supposed to talk about before we found out about Rambu. Wilbur explained, the ache making itself known in his chest once again. At this, Tommy's eyes widened as understanding washed over him. I don't really know if now is a good time, Will. The ache got worse. Tom, we're not going to have any other time for it. The truth burned his throat, but he forced it out anyway. Because they were long past the point of pretending. This was the end, and the guards could come take them at any time. If there was going to be a time to get it all out on the table, it was now or never. Tommy understood this. Wilbur knew he did. Even still, he flinched at Wilbur's words, as if he'd been slapped. Wilbur was quiet as Tommy squeezed his eyes shut, taking a few breaths to steady himself in the face of their grim reality. After a few moments, he opened his eyes again, and Wilbur thought they had never looked like such a dull shade of blue. You're right, he whispered. We should do it now. A few beats passed. Wilbur's heart was pounding in his chest, but began to slow when Tommy reached out to squeeze Wilbur's fingers between his own. I don't really know where to start, Wilbur murmured. What do you want to know? A lot, Tommy huffed, keeping his eyes on their joined hands. But I guess one of the first things is just, when we got to Zephyr's Fall, you changed. You got angrier and stopped talking to me as much. Then you got paranoid and you were so different. What happened? Swallowing down the lump in his throat, Wilbur squeezed his eyes shut as he tried to figure out how to put that entire mess into words. It's hard to explain, he confessed. I don't fully know what happened myself. From the minute we landed on Zephyr's Fall, I was scared shitless. I didn't know if I'd made the right choice bringing us there or not. I kept thinking that with one wrong move, we'd end up getting killed again. Then the negotiations came into play, and as your advisor, I felt like I had to find a way to keep us from joining the Empire. But I didn't have the slightest idea how the fuck to do that. What do you mean you didn't know? Tommy asked, frowning now. You kept telling me what to do or what to say, like you had some giant plan I couldn't know about. Wilbur let out a pained laugh and shook his head. No, there was no plan. At least not a coherent one. I had a few different ideas, but then someone else would come along that would fuck them up. So I kept coming up with other angles. But if I'm being honest, I never knew what the fuck I was doing. I was just guessing and hoping for the best. You certainly didn't act like it, Tommy huffed, turning Wilbur's hand over in his own to mess with his fingers. A nervous habit he'd kept from when he was a little kid. I know, Wilbur nodded. I didn't want you to worry, so I just acted like I knew what I was doing as best I could. Tommy glanced up at this, his frown deepening. What do you mean you didn't want me to worry? I don't know, Wilbur bit the inside of his cheek, trying not to squirm under Tommy's gaze. I'm your older brother, and I'm your advisor. It's my job to advise you on political decisions, and it's also my job to take care of you. I didn't want you to think I wasn't capable of either of those things. I'm 15, though, Tommy argued. It's not your job to take care of me. Wilbur had to fight the urge to roll his eyes. Of course it is. It's always been my job. I'm not fucking helpless, Wilbur, Tommy exclaimed, pulling his hand away now. You're a child, though, and I don't mean that as an insult. Wilbur pushed. I know you think you can take care of yourself, but you can't. Not when you're only 15. Tommy was silent for a moment, his face screwed up into a troubled frown. Then, who's taking care of you, though? Wilbur's breathing hitched, and he looked down at his lap to avoid Tommy's eyes. You're 19. That's not much older than me, dickhead. Tommy snapped, and Wilbur felt a hand grab his chin, forcing his head up. If you're taking care of me, then I get to take care of you too. And while Wilbur had already been trying to adjust the idea of letting Tommy help him when he needed it, it was still something that was easier said than done. I'm sorry I stopped trusting you, Wilbur whispered as Tommy dropped the hand holding his chin. I got so wrapped up in my own head. I didn't know what to do, and things just spiraled out of control. Tommy's eyes fell back down to his lap. It's okay. And I'm sorry for brushing off your paranoia so much when you ended up being right. Shaking his head, Wilbur put a hand on Tommy's shoulder. It's okay. I was acting like a dick, so I get why you didn't want to listen to me. Nodding, Tommy was silent for another moment, something clearly on his mind. Wilbur waited. And waited. Did you trust Phil? And just like that, all the air was knocked out of his lungs. What? Phil? Did you trust him before we found out about Rambo? Tommy asked. The strange thing was, the question wasn't an angry one. It wasn't suspicious either. His voice was soft, if a bit solemn. Wilbur couldn't even detect a hint of jealousy. It was just a question, not a test. But it wasn't a question Wilbur had a clear answer to. I don't know, he admitted, wincing when Phil's face flashed in his mind. With certain things, yes, I did. But I think more than anything, He took a breath. I wanted to trust him. So fucking badly. I wanted to believe everything he told me. His eyes were burning again, although no tears fell. Still, Tommy reached out to grab his hand again, and some of the tension leaked out of his shoulders at the touch. Did he tell you that you wanted to believe? Tommy asked in that same solemn tone. I mean, how did you two even get so close? I thought you hated him because of the ominous shit he would say to you. But then you just kept talking to him, and that was when you started acting really weird. I wish I understood it, Wilbur murmured, squeezing Tommy's hand. We just talked. He told me about his childhood and how Zephyr's Fall came to be, and he understood me. I had so much shit going through my head all the time, and he knew exactly how to put it into words. He paused, blinking fast as he looked up at the ceiling. It happened without me even realizing it. I just found myself seeking him out more and more for advice. And he'd say these things to me that I didn't even realize I needed to hear. What would he say to you? Tommy pushed. His voice cracked, and Wilbur squeezed his eyes shut again. He'd tell me that I was worth something, that I had potential, that I could be more than just a bastard prince. What? Of course you're fucking worth something. You insane? Tommy exclaimed, looking both confused and angry at the same time. You know that. Don't be stupid. Clenching his jaw, Wilbur carefully avoided Tommy's eyes. Tommy, I was raised to be your advisor. Nothing more. I mean, you're supposed to be my advisor, yeah, but that doesn't mean you're not worth anything. Tommy was only getting more confused as the seconds ticked on. Will, come on, that's fucking stupid. Why would you even think that? I'm a bastard, Wilbur pointed out, his voice thick. You're the only reason I was allowed to stay on Eldingvegger. I have no ties to it otherwise. You've lived here since you were like 2 years old or something. It's just as much your home as it is mine, Tommy argued. And why the fuck do you keep bringing up the bastard thing? Who cares about that? Everyone cares! Wilbur suddenly shouted, making Tommy jump back in surprise. My entire life, I was never allowed to forget the fact that I was lucky to be here. No one, and I mean no one in this palace let me forget that. Will, I know the servants called you a bastard sometimes, but sometimes? Wilbur cut Tommy off with a bitter laugh. I was called an Orlin. I was called a bastard. I was called a leech. No one wanted me here. You were the only person on the entire planet who wanted me here. So that's why I stayed. And everyone around us made damn sure I knew it. At this, Tommy's eyes widened as something akin to horror washed over his face. Are you saying that when I wasn't around, everyone acted differently the minute you stepped in the room? Wilbur exclaimed, his eyes still burning. It's not your fault, but you saw a very different side of the palace than I did. Tommy considered this for a moment, brows furrowing as his eyes began to water. I called you a bastard, he said quietly, staring at their joined hands. Wilbur winced. You did. How bad was that? Tommy continued, forcing himself to meet Wilbur's eyes. I was just calling you that because I knew it upset you, but I didn't realize. It's okay, you didn't know. Wilbur tried to reassure him. Tommy shook his head. It's not okay. Tell me how badly I fucked up with that. I swear I'm okay now. You don't need to beat yourself up over this. But I want to know! Tommy pushed, squeezing his hand. I can handle it, okay? Unlike a ranking of shitty things I've said to you, how bad was it? The worst, was Wilbur's first thought. Because that was the truth. That was the worst thing Tommy ever said to him. But he didn't want to tell Tommy that because what purpose did it serve? He didn't know any better, and Wilbur knew that now. It was fine. Hold on a moment. But Tommy was demanding an answer. His grip on Wilbur's hands was turning bruising. And one thing he and his brothers shared was their stubbornness. And Tommy wasn't going to let go of this. He decided to put it as simply as he could. I thought you calling me that was your way of disowning me, Wilbur confessed, keeping his head down. Tommy made a choked noise at this, and suddenly, his little brother was wrapping his arms around him in the tightest hug he'd ever felt. "I'm sorry," Tommy exclaimed, his voice muffled by Wilbur's shirt. "I'm so fucking sorry. I didn't mean that. I swear It's okay, Tommy, I know," Wilbur reassured him, pulling Tommy close to his chest. "It's not okay," Tommy protested. "I'm telling you it is," Wilbur shot back. "You didn't mean it like that. I get it." Tommy shook his head and pulled back from the hug enough to frown at him. "You still got hurt." "I'm okay now, though." Although Tommy didn't seem to believe him, after a few moments of staring each other down, he sighed and looked away. "I'm sorry, Will," he repeated, sounding far more serious than Wilbur was used to. And even though Wilbur told himself he was fine, although he'd stopped being angry at Tommy for that when he first realized that wasn't how his brother had meant it, he felt something inside of him crack at the apology. "I forgive you," Wilbur whispered. Tommy pulled him into another hug, and Wilbur let himself curl into his little brother. Although he was too exhausted for violent sobbing like their last serious talk, a few tears still dripped down his cheeks, staining Tommy's shirt as Tommy played with the ends of his hair again. They stayed like this for a few minutes in silence. The ache in Wilbur's chest slowly faded, his tears drying up as the fingers playing with his hair tugged and tugged in a way that was gentle enough to never hurt. It reminded Wilbur of when Tommy was a baby and tried to play with Wilbur's hair. He was fascinated by how curly it was, not realizing he had the same curls right on top of his own head, and would twist them around his fingers, often hard enough to make him cry out in pain. There was no pain this time. None at all. Eventually, Wilbur pulled away, although Tommy stayed close to his side as they both settled back against the pillows. "So, Phil, helped you out after our fight?" Tommy asked once they were comfortable again. Wilbur nodded. "Yeah, he did. He took me to his office because I was kind of, having a breakdown." Tommy winced at this, and I ended up just falling asleep in there. I woke up in an unfamiliar room, and Jack told me I'd been given a room in the personal wing of the palace. Tommy's eyes widened. "You didn't ask for that?" "No, not at all." Wilbur shook his head. "You thought I did?" "Techno just told me you'd been staying in there for the time being, so I figured you'd at least talk to Phil about it," Tommy explained. "I mean, I could have asked him to move me back into the main wing of the palace," Wilbur admitted, twisting his fingers in front of him. "Part of the reason why I didn't was because I was afraid of running into you, so I figured that'd be less of a risk if I was in there." Tommy considered this for a moment, considered the fact that Wilbur said that was only part of the reason. "But you also wanted to stay there," Tommy finished for him. Wilbur forced himself to nod. "I did." To his surprise again, there was no anger at this. Tommy just looked understanding. Far more understanding than Wilbur would have expected. "Tommy," Wilbur said after a few moments, "can I ask you about Techno?" Although Tommy tensed at the question, he nodded after a beat of hesitation. I told you how close I got to Phil. I told you how I got close to Phil. How did you get close to Techno? Blinking quickly, Tommy curled further back into the pillows, keeping his eyes on the bed. Kinda similar to what you described with Phil. During our training sessions, we just talk. I'd start ribbing on him, and he'd shoot right back. We'd banter a bit while we sparred, but during the water breaks and stuff, he just started asking me how I was doing. I'd always tell him I was fine, until one day I just couldn't. I didn't even get into an argument that day or anything. He just went talking to me, and I was so pissed at you for being pissed at me, and he cut himself off with a sharp breath, squeezing his eyes shut for a moment before opening them again. It was just a lot. I didn't tell Techno what was going on, really. I just said I wasn't doing well, and he helped. He admitted, his voice wobbling. Told me to go nuts on a training dummy. But when I got right in front of it, I didn't even want to. I punched it a few times, but then I just sat on the floor. Techno seemed a little confused, but then he asked, since I didn't want to train, if I wanted to help him with something. We left the palace on one of those trains, and he showed me this small ice cave just filled with these weird berries that grew from the ceiling. He called them ice clouds or something, and showed me how to check the leaves for mold and shit. And it was just another breath. It was really nice. He didn't push me to talk or anything, and I don't know, something shifted between us after that. A shudder ran down Tommy's back, and Wilbur wrapped an arm around his shoulders. That's why I thought I could trust him, Tommy explained. He didn't push. He'd ask how I was doing, but that was about it. If he saw I was upset, we'd just go do something like train or check on the ice clouds. It always helped me kinda get my thoughts in order. He paused again, a smile flickering over his face for the briefest of moments. He's also really funny. Wilbur blinked, thinking back to all his awkward encounters with Techno in the library or the hallways. That's kind of difficult to believe. I know, but it's true, Tommy insisted. He'll just say the funniest shit in the most deadpan voice ever. He always... Cutting himself off again, Tommy's smile disappeared, something pain flashing over it instead. He always knew how to make me laugh when I was upset. Unsure of what to say to that, Wilbur simply tightened the arm he had around his brother. Tommy leaned into his side, shoulders shaking as he buried his face in Wilbur's shirt. The pain in Tommy's voice was so palpable, Wilbur felt it as if it were his own. Listening to Tommy talk about the time he spent with Techno hurt not only because of how badly the betrayal must have been for him, but also because now he understood why Tommy trusted him. Tommy wasn't stupid for trusting Techno. No, he wasn't stupid at all. And Wilbur hated that he berated Tommy for it all that time ago. Will? Tommy suddenly asked, startling him out of his thoughts. Yeah? Back in the hangar, when you used your voice on Phil, Techno, and Puffy, Phil said something to you. Tommy said, lifting his head only the tiniest bit so he could meet Wilbur's eyes. called you Little Bird, right? Shit. Keeping his eyes on the ceiling, Wilbur forced himself to nod. Yeah, he, calls me that sometimes. Why? Wilbur took another breath to steady himself. He never said why he called me that specifically, but he told me that it was a term of endearment on Elytra. He paused, trying to slow down his racing heart, specifically one that parents would use for their children. Tommy was silent for a moment. Then, he rested his head back on Wilbur's shoulder, and Wilbur turned to rest his chin on Tommy's hair. Do you think it wasn't all a lie? Tommy asked in a voice barely above a whisper. Do you think they actually cared about us? And there was only one thing Wilbur could say to that. I hope they didn't, he whispered, wrapping his arm around Tommy as tightly as he could. If they had been wrong, if Phil and Techno had actually cared, if he and Tommy had left them behind only to get executed by Dream, that hurt far worse than believing that it was a lie all along. Wilbur wasn't sure when it happened, but at some point he and Tommy fell asleep again. He woke up several hours later to the sound of footsteps echoing down the hall. Bolting upright, Wilbur's heart slammed against his ribs, wondering if this was it. If the guards were coming to take him and Tommy to their executions. Before he could work himself into a full panic, though, a familiar figure appeared in the doorway, and Wilbur was hit with both a wave of relief and dread-inducing nausea. Tommy, Wilbur said, locking eyes with the person in the doorway. Get up. Wilbur, I'm tired. Tommy groaned. Tommy. At his change in tone, Tommy's eyes shot open. He jolted upright, and as soon as he noticed the person at their door, his mouth dropped open. Tubbo stood behind the shimmering barrier, wide blue eyes reflecting a strange shade of pink from the light. His mix of brown and blonde hair was a bit longer than it had been before the invasion, and his uniform seemed to be in better condition than Wilbur ever remembered seeing it. But besides that, he was the same. So painfully and utterly the same. For a long moment, Tubbo and Tommy just stared at each other. Then, after nearly a minute of silence, you I can't hear anything you're saying to me. I can't hear anything you're saying to me, Tubbo said, cutting Tommy off. There's a silencing barrier in place. Fuck. Yeah, the silencing barrier. With the shock of seeing Tubbo, both he and Tommy had forgotten about it. Tommy scowled, opening his mouth again, before shutting it and holding up a middle finger. To Wilbur's surprise, Tubbo only sighed at this, and glanced down at a metal tray he had in his hands. It was then Wilbur realized Tubbo must have been there to deliver them food. He climbed off the bed first, walking over to the door to sit down in front of the barrier. Tubbo glanced between him and Tommy for a moment, before sitting down as well. Wilbur watched Tubbo tap a few buttons on the side of the barrier. Near the bottom, a small part of the shimmering barrier shifted from pink to white, indicating objects could be passed through it. Tubbo slid the tray through to their side, before tapping another button, turning the barrier back to pink. The food on the tray wasn't much, to say the least. 2 bread rolls with jam, and 2 Epleys almost rolling off the metal. There was also a bottle of water for each of them, but that was it. Wilbur wasn't too bothered by this, though. Being put on an executioner's block didn't exactly stir up an appetite. Tommy got up from the bed, settling down next to Wilbur in front of the tray. Tubbo was still sitting on the other side, glancing between Wilbur and Tommy while wringing his hands in his lap. For a moment, no one moved. Wilbur could barely even breathe with how much tension was filling the air. Then, Tommy reached behind him, and Wilbur realized he must have grabbed his holopad off his desk. He tapped on the screen a few times, using his finger to write out a message on the digital notepad, before holding it up for Tubbo to see. "You knew the invasion was going to happen, fucking traitor." Tubbo flinched at the vitriol, eyes falling to his lap as he hunched his shoulders in on himself. "Yeah, I knew," he admitted, his voice low. "But I didn't..." Cutting himself off, Tubbo glanced at the guards posted on either side of the barrier. While Wilbur was fairly sure they both had silencing features on their helmets just in case the barrier went down, he could still see in Tubbo's eyes that he was still being wary of being heard. He reached into his own pocket, turning on another holopad and dimming the brightness as low as it would go. Then, he wrote out his own message and held it up for Wilbur and Tommy to see. "I didn't know Dream was going to execute you. I thought you would just be exiled." Tommy scoffed. "So you were fine with us being exiled off our own fucking planet. Okay, Tubbo." "I wasn't okay with it. I wasn't okay with it," Tubbo whispered, curling his hands into fists. Another beat passed as Tommy stared at him. Then, he wrote a single word on the notepad and underlined it 3 times. "Why?" Tubbo glanced between his own holopad and Tommy's, biting the inside of his cheek. He looked over his shoulder at the guard standing behind him, before writing out a much longer message. "I didn't have a choice. Eret made me. They said the invasion was going to happen no matter what, and if I gave you guys sleeping pills, it'd be easier to get you off the planet without either of you getting hurt. I only found out Dream wanted to kill you guys after you escaped." It matched up with the conversation he and Tommy had overheard between Tubbo and Eret while they were in the crawl space. Even still, disgust crawled up Wilbur's throat at such a bold-faced admission. Taking the holopad from Tommy, Wilbur wrote, "You could have warned us." I was trying to do the best thing for everyone," Tubbo argued. "The invasion was going to happen either way, right? I was told you were just going to be shipped off planet. So when Eret told me to drug you, I thought about it and agreed that you guys being knocked the fuck out while everything went down was a lot easier than you trying to escape somewhere else." Tommy ripped the holopad out of Wilbur's hands to write in response. "We would have died if we took those pills." Tubbo flinched. "I know," he whispered. "I'm so glad you didn't." Wilbur grabbed the holopad again. "We're going to die now." There was no surprise on Tubbo's face as he read Wilbur's words. They were well past the point of lies. Tubbo knew exactly what was going to happen to them this time. Tubbo's hands shook as he wrote out another message. "I'm sorry." Even without saying it out loud, Wilbur could hear all the shades of Tubbo's apology. Guilt, grief, resignation. There was no chance of saving them now. Last time, they were able to slip away in the chaos of the invasion, but Asempi's control had settled in now. There were no bars to squeeze between. No crawl space for them to hide in. There was a sniffle beside him, and Wilbur looked over to see Tommy's eyes brimming with tears. He dropped the hollow pad and pushed the food tray out of the way to press his hand against the shimmering barrier. Immediately, Tubbo did the same, placing his hand right where Tommy's was. "Please," Tommy begged, his voice cracking. "Help us." Tubbo took a shaky breath, squeezing his eyes shut as he rested his forehead on the barrier beside his hand. But before he could respond, there was another set of footsteps echoing down the hall. Jumping back from the barrier like it had shocked him, Tubbo shook himself off, the sadness on his face being replaced by a mask of perfect neutrality. His jaw still clenched, and his eyes were slightly red. His jaw was still clenched, and his eyes were slightly red, but otherwise nothing seemed amiss as he stumbled to his feet to greet whoever was coming their way. "I see your channel point redemption. God, you should have been here earlier. They were having a talk. Tommy and Wilbur were having a talk. Like, the talk that they needed to have before they realized that Rambu was a spy. And when I got into character, I fucking mean it. My eyes were filled with tears. I was crying. I was crying so much. Yeah, Tommy and Tubbo are back on Eldingvegr, just waiting to be executed at this point. Your Highness, I was just bringing the princes their food like I was ordered, Tubbo stuttered, bowing his head at someone just out of view of the door. "It's all right, Tubbo. That's all right, Tubbo," a deep, familiar voice replied. "If you don't mind, though, I'd like to have a word with them both." Immediately, anger had flashed over Tommy's face again, and a similar rage simmered behind Wilbur's ribs, because they both knew the voice of the original traitor when they heard it. "Oh, okay." Tubbo nodded. Fuck! Nodded! Tubbo nodded! Nodded! God damn it! I hate my stupid fucking brain! I hate my stupid fucking brain! Oh my god. Anyway, moving away from the door, he spared one last worried look at the two of them before forcing himself to turn away. He disappeared down the hall, his footsteps fading out within seconds. Then, Eret stepped into his place. Like Tubbo, their hair had grown since the last time Wilbur had seen them. They were dressed in a bare-shouldered gown made of billowing blue chiffon, the neckline embroidered with delicate gold thread and several heavy jewels. Gold power decorated their pure white eyes and sharp cheekbones, but the makeup wasn't enough to distract from the dark circles that announced their exhaustion to the world. For a moment, all Wilbur could do was stare at them, at the person who had been the closest thing to a guardian he had growing up, to the power-hungry advisor who, less than a year before, lied to Wilbur's face and told him that Asempi wasn't a threat. Eret broke their eye contact first. "Gods," they said, waving at the soldiers to get their attention. "Would you mind leaving us alone for a moment? I wish to speak to the prisoners alone." The prisoners. The soldiers both nodded, boots clanking heavily against the marble as they disappeared from view of the doorway. Immediately, the poker face Eret was wearing disappeared. Something like grief twisted their expression as they walked over to the barrier, kneeling down in front of it with a soft sigh. "They're only at the end of the hall, so I can't speak as freely as I'd like, but it's better than nothing," they murmured, glancing between both the brothers. "But it's been a while, hasn't it?" "That's it? After all these months, after agonizing over Eret's betrayal and what could have caused it, all they had to say was that it had been a while?" "You fucking snake," Wilbur snarled, enunciating his words as clearly as he could so Eret could read his lips. Eret winced at the insult. "I understand you're upset at me." "Fuck you!" Tommy suddenly shouted, slamming his fist against the barrier and making it flicker. "You're a fucking traitor! You're a traitor to the crown! To my father! To our mother! To our mother! I understand you're upset, but I can't hear anything you're saying to me," Eret finished, furrowing their brows at Tommy's shouting. Gritting his teeth, Wilbur grabbed the hollow pad again and started to write out a lengthy message detailing how much of a prick Eret was. After a moment, though, he stared at it and crossed it out to write a single word instead. "Cunt." Eret sighed at the message. I suppose I deserve that." Erasing the message, Wilbur wrote out a longer one this time. "What the fuck are you here for, you conniving snake? To gloat? To mock us over the fact that you won?" "No, Eret's breathing hitched, and they dragged a hand through their hair. "I swear to you, on my life, wasn't aware that Dream was planning to execute you. But you were still going to exile us from our own planet," Wilbur wrote, his hands shaking with rage. "You were overthrowing a monarchy that stood for centuries just to hold on to your crown." Blinking, Eret nodded. "I won't try to dismiss it. I didn't want to lose my power. So when Dream presented me with an opportunity to hold on to the throne, I couldn't find it in myself to say no. But if I had known that Dream meant you both harm, I never would have agreed." Tommy took the hollow pad to write out his own response. If that's supposed to make us feel better, you're doing a shit job." Taking the hollow pad back from Tommy, Wilbur wrote out another reply before Eret could continue. "Again, why the fuck are you here? I have a question for you both," Eret said, something grim casting over their face. "Why did you come back?" That wasn't what Wilbur had been expecting. He blinked, wondering if he heard Eret right. Beside him, Tommy frowned, clearly just as confused as he was. After a few moments of silence, Wilbur grabbed the hollow pad and wrote out a response. "We've been in negotiations with the Antarctic Empire since we escaped." "I know that," Eret told him softly. "Dream already suspected it. But Princess Marina confirmed it for us several months ago. I thought you were going to come back here with the full force of the Antarctic Empire's army in tow. That's why I'm so confused that you're here. I don't understand why you left on your own." Fuck. Of course Hannah told Dream they were under the Antarctic Empire's protection. There was no reason for her not to tell him. That must have been how Sapnap caught them so quickly. SMP probably had surveillance on Zephyr's fort to see if they were going to make any moves towards Eldingvegr, but got Wilbur and Tommy flying out on their own instead. They'd flown right into SMP's hands. Our negotiations weren't going as expected, Wilbur explained, holding the note up for Eric to see. Wilbur, Eric whispered, their face falling even more. I was so relieved when I found out you were on Zephyr's 4, because that was the safest place in the whole galaxy for you to be. Dream might be arrogant, but he's no fool. He wasn't going to hunt you down when you were under the protection of Emperor Filza. Then you... Their voice cracked. But then you left. And I can't protect either of you here. Frowning, Wilbur moved to write out another message. But Eric kept talking before he could. I've tried everything I can, they explained in a rushed whisper. Dream was going to have Sapnap execute you both on the royal ship, but I convinced him that he needed to follow intergalactic law and hold a trial for you since he can't use the excuse that you were killed in the invasion. It's a sham trial that's already happening. Neither of you will even appear in court. But he's going to claim that you two had plans to assassinate him. Once he finds you guilty, you'll both be put to death. It's just a damn paperwork trail he needs to have ready. But all it does is buy you time. Wilbur had heard of sham trials like that before. Intergalactic law didn't particularly care about how real the charges were, or if a fair trial had actually been held. There just needed to be a paperwork trail, like Garrett had said. We can't escape on our own. We've looked. Wilbur wrote on the hollow pad. If you want to help us, turn off the silencing barrier. Sighing, Eric shook their head. I can't. Both the silencing feature and the barrier itself is password protected, with only Dream and Sapnap knowing what the password is. Even the guards stationed at your door don't know what it is, so they can act as a fail-safe in case anything malfunctions and you can use your voices on them. Even under your command, they wouldn't be able to let you out. Of course they would lock the silencing feature after their failed attempt at rescuing Nikki. Disappointment settled itself over Wilbur's shoulders, weighing him down and choking him from the inside out. Although he hadn't gotten his hopes up, for the briefest moment of moments, he thought that Eric might actually be able to help them. Their fate was sealed, though. There was no getting out of this. Wilbur wrote another note. Our blood is on your hands. Taking an unsteady breath, Eric wrapped their arms over their chest and leaned back to push to their feet. I am so sorry. With that, they waved for the guards to come back to their positions. Then, they turned away from the door and didn't spare a single glance back at them. Silence hung over the room as Wilbur stared at the bread and fruit sitting on the tray in front of him. His head was throbbing, and the ache in his chest had turned into a black hole. Maybe his anger should have lingered. Maybe he should have been fighting off tears. Maybe he should have been trying to make his peace with his impending death. Instead, though, all Wilbur could think of was one thing. They'd made the wrong choice by leaving Zephyr's floor.
Wait, surprise!
Oh wait, hope you guys enjoyed the chapter, because chapter 9 is intended to be the epilogue, so chapter 28 is really going to be our finale. Wait, the surprise? Oh! Next long fic. I've seen emails about this. We're probably going to be reading this one after we finish up this one. Through a Glass Divine? Wait, it's a cyberpunk fantasy fusion AU. Excuse me, sorry, Jesus, what the hell? With some really fun world building. Wilbur-centric, very heavy focus on crime boys. I'm excited! Oh my god. God, I wanna read the finale. Like, I wanna read chapter 28. But I still have packing to do, and I need to pack up my PC. And I want to get a decent night's sleep because I have to be up a little bit earlier than normal tomorrow. Okay, how long is the next chapter? Okay, yeah, no. Yeah. We're not finishing this tonight. I don't think I even could. I don't think I have the mental strength to do that. Okay. Let's see who's live. What's this? Oh! I know who will read. Tina. Let's read Tina. Tina's doing art and then I think Valorant later? Or maybe. It was a Valorant maybe. Ow! If you heard that, that was me cracking my knuckles. And that one was particularly painful. Anyway. Next stream might be tomorrow. Probably won't be the 7th because I'm going to be hanging out with friends. We'll see. Now that college is going back, like now that I'm going back to college, I really don't know how my my stream schedule is going to be, especially with a job. So we'll see. All right. Thank y'all so much for watching, and I will see y'all next time. All right.